Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Josh Guerrero, and I'm the host and founder of this podcast, which is simply titled The All-Around Adventure Podcast. This is the show where you hear amazing tales from afar and get the all-important life lessons that go along with them. Whether you're joining me for the first time or if you've been listening for a while now, I certainly want to welcome you here, and I also want to thank you for being here today. This podcast would not be possible without your support, so I greatly appreciate you tuning in today. And here we are, the final episode for 2019. It's been one hell of a year, if I do say so. I've saw some growth with the podcast, a little bit of stagnation here and there. I've got to connect with some amazing people. And on this podcast, I'm just talking with travelers of all kinds. I'm talking with warriors and entrepreneurs, digital nomads, best-selling authors, bloggers, adventurers, you name it. If they have a fantastic travel story to tell with some great life lessons to share, it's my job to seek them out and bring them on this podcast to extract their stories and life lessons through powerful conversations to help you level up in your life. And that's done on my regular show, but this episode is going to be a little bit different. You're just going to be stuck with me today for better or for worse, and this is the blog readings, or TBR for short, which is exactly how it sounds, where I just read my blog posts, both past and present, for you to have on the go in audio format. And the post that I'm going to be reading for you all today is titled 3 Key Takeaways from 2019. Of course, I've learned a lot of valuable life lessons this year, but I'm just going to whittle the list down to 3 today, because I don't really like to have a very long, extensive list, and I obviously, of course, don't want to have to write that much. So 3 key takeaways for 2019. I hope you all like this post and that you do find it insightful and that you find a couple of things that you can carry with you as we move on into the new year. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into this. And this is 3 key takeaways from 2019. This past year has been a bit of a whirlwind for me. I've experienced successes and failures, joy and pain, growth in my brand, and moments of being stagnant. I also had the opportunity to visit some new places and do some cool shit. 2 that I can think of right offhand are flying in a helicopter over a big Cypress National Preserve and looking for archaeological sites, and enduring a brutal Spartan race in the mountains near Lake Tahoe. This past year has also been a great opportunity for learning. The amazing experiences that I've had, as well as the incredible guests that I've been able to connect with, have brought forth many life lessons that have really struck a chord with me. And these are lessons that I will take with me, not just into this coming year, but for the rest of my life as well. So for this post, I'm going to talk about 3 key takeaways from some of my experiences during 2019. And these are in no particular order. Number 1, using fear to my advantage. This comes from my conversation with Patrick Sweeney. He talked about different scenarios of times when people have crumbled in the face of fear and times when they have used fear as fuel to propel them towards what they want to achieve. It was during my visit to Lake Tahoe when I had the opportunity to sit down with him. I was there for the Spartan Media Fest, which was a gathering of other podcasters and content creators who talk about physical and mental resiliency. The festival was held 2 days prior to the Spartan Race World Championship. Though prior to going out to Tahoe, I was feeling some fear myself, and that fear was imposter syndrome. When I saw the list of attendees, I felt as though I was a bit out of my depth. Most of those attending were much farther along in their content creating journey than I was, and some of their feats were absolutely amazing. Some of them had set world records, done TED Talks, had followings that were literally thousands of times larger than mine, and they were highly sought after. And when I would reach out to them to see if they'd be interested in joining me on my podcast, it was usually their assistant or some other member of their team who would reply back to me. Whereas I'm an independent podcaster who plays the role of writer, host, assistant, editor, publisher, and marketing manager for the All-Around Adventure podcast. So admittedly, there were times when I thought to myself, should I even go to Tahoe? Do I even rate to be among this group of heavy hitters? And the reality was that I was afraid. So to counter this, before I let these moments of self-doubt go too far, I hopped on my laptop, RSVP'd saying that I was attending the festival, and booked my plane ticket. Now I had no choice. I had to follow through. And I was glad that I went. Not only did I get to visit beautiful Lake Tahoe, a place that I've never been to before, but I also had the opportunity to meet some amazing people and have some great conversations. I've mentioned Patrick Sweeney, who almost lost his life to leukemia, only to go on to become a full-time adventurer. I also talked to Joel Runyon, who ran an ultramarathon on all 7 continents. There was also Chris Waddell, who went to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, despite being paralyzed from the waist down. Sometimes we have a tendency to let fears build up in our minds, and we make them appear far more formidable than what they actually are. But when we foster courage and take on those fears, we realize that they aren't that big of a deal. And we wonder why we were even afraid in the first place. Number 2, seek out challenges. This is another takeaway that I got from my time in Lake Tahoe. As part of the Spartan Media Fest, I was also invited to participate in a Spartan Super Race that was set up just for the attendees. The Super Race is 8 miles long and has 25 obstacles, making it a pretty formidable endeavor. The physical training regimen that I was doing prior to being invited consisted mostly of weight training with a focus on hypertrophy, and I did very little in the way of cardio training. Also, I received my invite to the festival and the race just about 1 month prior. Needless to say, I was a bit nervous. Not only had I done very little running lately, but the environment was going to be completely different. Lake Tahoe sits at over 6,000 feet in elevation, whereas where I live in Florida, I'm at sea level. Regardless, once again before letting too many thoughts of self-doubt run through my mind, I signed up for the race. Now I was locked in, and it was time to get to work. I put together a running plan that gradually increased to further distance runs as I went, and about a week before my flight to Tahoe, I completed a 9-mile run. Not too shabby for someone who hasn't run in a long time, if I do say so. Still though, what awaited me was going to kick my ass nonetheless. Not only was I at a much higher elevation during the race, but I also had to contend with a drastic change in temperature. 3 days before the race, I was at home in Florida with a temperature of about 90 degrees. But up on top of that mountain in California, it was 40 degrees with a wind chill below freezing. Needless to say, I felt it. The race was definitely tough, and I was hurting by the time I crossed the finish line. And I certainly didn't finish in a very graceful fashion, but I finished. Once again, not bad for someone who hasn't run in a while, if I do say so. Despite the pain and the ungraceful run, I felt good for having finished it. And that's the value of seeking out challenges. We're reminded of what it is that we're capable of. Not only that, but we also set ourselves up to better face the inevitable challenges that life throws at us. In this day and age, we have the luxury to avoid challenges and be comfortable if we want. Instead of having to hunt and forage for our own food, we can push a few buttons and someone will bring a ready-to-eat meal to our door. We can also take elevators and escalators so we don't have to walk as much. However, I feel that when we seek comfort, we're doing ourselves a disservice. Because when life decides to send challenges our way, we won't have the tools necessary to react accordingly. But when we seek out challenges ourselves, we build up both mental and physical strength to counteract life's challenges. That's what I believe draws many people to do things like Spartan races. At least it was for me. Because I know that tough times are ahead of me, whether I like it or not. Therefore, I intend to be ready. And number 3, help others win. Whenever I invite a guest to join me on the podcast, there's one important thing that I tell them. Obviously, when inviting them to come on my show, I'm looking to create content in order to grow my brand, which is very beneficial for me. However, it's not just about what my guests can do for me. I also must consider what I can do for them. Therefore, I let them know that I'll leave a segment towards the end of the episode for them to talk about their blogs, books, products, etc., so they can have the means to promote their own content. Once again, many of the guests that I've had on my podcast have much larger followings than I do, but my podcast is still unique and it gives them an opportunity to tell their story in a way that they may not have been able to before. It also allows them to share their insights and their expertise on various matters, which they, in turn, can share with their own audience to benefit them. So I aim to make it a win-win situation. Sometimes I notice a negative view of people who've gained success. Some people seem to think that they must have walked over other people in order to get to where they are. But based on what I've observed, that just isn't the case. They form symbiotic relationships with others and they help each other to grow and become better. And I've also found that they're very willing to help others, especially those who are starting out, because they've been there. They were once beginners too, so they understand what it's like to be starting out and having to struggle to gain momentum. Sometimes the path to achieving what you want in life can be treacherous, and you don't get further down that path by pushing other people back. You get further by banding together, charging forward, and crushing obstacles that are in the way. So ultimately, don't be afraid to ask for help, but also make yourself open to being helpful. I will also say this: don't keep score. Don't go help someone and then use that as leverage to get them to help you in return. That is not a sustainable way to form symbiotic relationships. So keep these things in mind as you continue down the path to achieving what you want, because I can guarantee you will need some help along the way. To wrap it up, there were certainly many life lessons and takeaways from this year, but when I decided to write about this topic, these were the ones that came to mind. I'd say 2019 was definitely an interesting year for me, but I'm certainly looking forward to kicking ass and continuing to bring great things forth in 2020. Well, there you have it, everyone. The final episode for 2019 is in the books. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you found it insightful and beneficial. And if you did, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast over on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you might be listening to your podcast. It's the weekly show. We got a brand new episode coming out every single Saturday, so hit that subscribe button so that way you don't miss a single episode. And while you're over at Apple Podcasts subscribing, make sure you leave us a 5-star rating and review. Those ratings and reviews go such a long way to getting the word out about this podcast, which is critical to our growth to get us trending higher. So if you just take a couple minutes out of your day to go leave a rating review, I will greatly appreciate it. And also share this podcast with a friend or family member who you think will also find it beneficial. And this podcast is just one of a few free resources that we offer at All Around Adventure. We also have a private Facebook group called Travel Titans, which is a group that was created for travelers to share their stories, their tips and advice, as well as their inspiration pertaining to both travel and self-development. And if you think you'd be interested in being a part of that, head over to facebook.com/groups/Travel Titans, and we look forward to seeing you there. And the last thing that I'd like to share before I close out here, I just want to thank you all for your support this year. You all have been amazing, and I cannot thank you enough for just choosing to download and listen to this podcast. Hear what I've had to share, hear what my guests had to share. I know there's a lot of great podcasts out there, but the fact that you decided to tune into this one, I really appreciate it, and I don't take it for granted. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. And that's all I have to say for now, and I'll be back next Saturday to kick off 2020 with a fantastic guest, so be sure to check back in. But until then, I'm Josh Guerrero saying be safe, happy travels, and always move forward.